Okay. I actually do have it on tonight. Okay. All right. So good evening again. So before you, you have the statement of accounts through December 31st, 2019. This report reflects 50% of the fiscal year, 40% of the school year. To date, we have expended 40.9% of our budget, encumbered 51.6%, leaving 7.5% to be encumbered. And as is typical in the other statements, the 7.5% are for items that are not conducive to encumbrances, such as substitute teachers, utilities, and so forth. There is nothing unusual to report in this statement today, and we will have all of the transfers for the mid-year reforecast at the end of January for that report.
Okay. Questions? Feedback? All right, thank you. Okay, moving on to action items. First this evening is the second read of the superintendent's budget. Before we open the floor for discussion on budget-related topics, I first want to thank Dr. Lutzy and Dr. Keating and Tracy Haberman and the entire cabinet and team for all of your hard work on this year's budget. We appreciate that this budget book is a culmination of many, many hours of hard work, meetings, analyses, questions, and responses from board members and more. So thank you. I would also like to make some remarks on the topic of the inclusion of school start times in our budget. Changing school schedules has been an important topic in front of the board for some time. So I ask that you please bear with me as I review our journey to this point, as I think it's an important topic and worthwhile time spent. The district engaged in the process of researching and understanding the connections between school start times and end times and student health and wellness in August of 2017, so 2.5 years ago. Since then, the district, with the support and direction from the Board of Education, has studied research on adolescent sleep and wellness in relationships to school start times, commissioned a study highlighting the work and lessons learned from other districts who made changes to school schedules, performed a transportation study and feasibility routing analysis, conducted an online survey on school start times, including parents, teachers, and students, discussed scheduling scenarios, 13 in total, between October 2018 and the start of the budget process this year, organized 2 community workshops, each involving approximately 70 representatives from PTC, PFA, parents, students, teachers, representatives from the arts, athletics, community members, childcare providers, mental health professionals, and more. They developed a district webpage highlighting all of our work related to school start times, and finally organized a public hearing and faculty meetings at each school to receive input and feedback from all stakeholders. In addition, there have been over 30 articles that have been published between the New Canaanite and Advertiser on our progress with school start times since August of 2017. We have heard from dozens of parents who have patiently waited, listened, and commented during our many BOE meetings. And we have received close to 400 emails from parents, teachers, and community members. And it has been quite impressive to read so many thoughtful and insightful emails. So the decision on whether to include changes to school schedules in next year's budget is challenging and complex. It is a decision that has had a constant presence on our minds. And regardless of the decision and how we choose to proceed, there will be many who are disappointed, who disagree, and there will be passionate reactions. At the same time, we are very grateful for a community that is so engaged and cares so deeply about its children and their future. New Canaan is well populated with thoughtful, intellectual individuals who can very effectively and fairly argue this topic from every point of view. The comments and emails we have received demonstrate a high level of awareness and appreciation for the many complex factors under consideration. So what have we learned from this feedback? We know that the vast majority of parents agree with change in support of more sleep for teens and the later start time for 7th through 12th grades. The research in support of adolescent sleep is well understood and appreciated. However, a prevailing theme in recent feedback concerns start times for grades K through 6 and how starting elementary schools on the first tier at 7:45 a.m. would impact younger students and their families. Some feel it is simply too early for their youngest children. Others cited commutes, logistics, and childcare challenges as reasons. We also heard from many dual working parents, some who wholeheartedly support this change, and others who strongly oppose this option. The board has strived for an open process that has allowed us to hear the many perspectives within our community. Perhaps what is most clear is that support for change is personal and often based on the current ages of children. Yet, many cited the profound research as reason to look long-term and support more sleep for adolescents. As a community, there will be trade-offs, and we will all need to adjust in some way, even if we do not change schedules in light of all the information we have. Each scheduling tier, with or without change, will have a different start and end times, and adjustments will need to be made over the years as children move through our system, as we all do today. As a fellow parent and a community member, I do believe that our community can and will rise and work together in response to whichever path we determine is the most appropriate for our students. All that said, in response to community feedback and board questions and some conversations over the weekend, I would like to propose consideration of one additional scheduling scenario. So if we approve the budget tonight, inclusive of costs to make the schedule changes, we could still consider one option, which would be to swap tiers 1 and 3. This would move SAC's lower division, grades 5 and 6, to a 7:45 a.m. start and pushes the 3 elementary schools to the third tier at 9:15. Tier 2 with grades 7 through 12 at 8:30 would remain unchanged. This scenario may more appropriately balance schedules in response to family and community needs. This option would not change the overall cost in the budget. We have the option to further review and receive feedback on this scenario and make our final recommendation to Dr. Letzi at the February 3rd Board of Education meeting. So thank you for hearing all of that. I'll now open it up to any feedback or questions on that. Carl?
I think it's a good idea to stay open on thinking about the best scenario that works for the town. I think I would be in favor of SurveyMonkey or some sort of final temperature taking of the town, so that everyone can have a voice and you don't have to actively send an email and be, very impassioned by this topic one way or the other. You're a citizen of the town and you should have a voice regardless of whether you want to send an email or not. So I would be very much in favor of setting something like that up so we can, really understand where people's heads are at on this.
Okay. Sherry? Jen?
Oh, yeah, okay. So I'd like to thank the administration and everyone that's worked so hard and extensively on the budget, also for all the research that's gone into all the school time wellness initiative, and to the community as well for all their engagement, for emails and testimonies. The emails were really, really good, and we've read all of them. I have struggled a little bit along the way with this decision. I've never doubted or questioned that teens need more sleep. It's more logistics and cost, really. And like Katrina said, this, the decision that's made, that we decide to make, is not going to be, it's not going to please everybody. As a member of this board, I do feel myself that, we represent the community, we represent, the teachers, but also, most importantly, the students. And for me, the science and the research that teens need more sleep is irrefutable in so many ways that we've talked about and heard about the past months, years. The sleep is crucial for their long-term wellness and well-being. So for that reason, I'm supporting the 8:30 start time, knowing that there's going to be hurdles that we've discussed. And knowing, overcoming athletic schedules and teachers with childcare, and I'm confident that, that we'll be able to work through those things if that is what is decided by the board. Regarding the elementary school times, I agree that we've just gotten so many emails, and it's clear that, elementary time is definitely, there's many issues with working parents and families and teachers as well, and so I think that that's a really good option that I would love to see as well. And I really believe in our leadership, and I know that it's something that you are recommending, that our leadership is recommending, and so I'm supporting it for that reason, and for the health of our kids, obviously, and it's also, I feel, it's happened in California, that it's mandated in 2023 for all high schools, cannot start before 8:30, and I kind of feel like it's happening around us, and I'd prefer us to be more able to shape it versus being told by our state. If that is what happens, I don't really know, but I, again, have seen it happening. And then lastly, just thank you, Katrina and Brian, for your leadership during all of this, because I know it hasn't always been easy, but thank you during this whole process.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Katrina, thank you for that summary. I mean, that was a very succinct summary of, a very thoughtful and deliberative 2.5-year process, which included, I mean, it was a great summary. I think we should publish that in the newspapers, because I think that is something that we need to continue to stress, is that this has been 2.5 years of research and investigation and a thoughtful process led by Brian and the administration. So I'm also supporting the start times, inclusion of the start times in the budget. I think the key things for me, and again, like Jen said, I've read every email and certainly note the concerns and considerations around parent and family schedules, the teacher commutes, sports practices, buses. I mean, there are many concerns, and I understand that, but I think at the base, we need to remind ourselves that we were elected to the Board of Education to serve our students' interests front and center, and I think we need to lead with our student interests and also lead with science, like Jen said. And I just keep coming back to the key fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that high schools not start earlier than 8:30 a.m. So I think we need to have that recommendation at the forefront of this scheduling. And also, as Jen mentioned, our administration is recommending that this schedule is the best plan for optimal learning across all ages and all grades. So I am also interested in looking at that swap of the first and third tier schedule. It seems like, based on the input we've gotten, that putting the elementary at 9:15 a.m. would better meet our community needs. But I do think we should move forward with this item in the budget.
I'll go to this side. Tiana? So I'd also like to thank the administration for all their work on this issue. At the end of the day, this is a decision that impacts our entire community, and we need to take those impacts to heart. I have expressed over the last month, when this has really kind of come to a head, that I do have serious reservations with the proposed start times. I think it's an interesting opportunity to look at something else, but I agree with Carl that we sort of got into the situation we're in now with sort of the huge community uprising and concern, because we really didn't communicate effectively to the community until January 7th, which was, gave us very little time to process that. But I compiled some notes, because this is an important issue, and I think everybody needs to understand where all of us are coming from as we vote. So to be clear, I support the concept of later start times, but I believe this plan has too many flaws and needs to be revised, and some of my concerns are as follows. When we first pursued a slightly different version of this potential later start time scenario back in June, we were given a price tag of $300,000 to $450,000 for busing, which figured very heavily into our decision to pursue this option. We had other options that were more expensive or had bigger parent support, and we chose to go with this because it felt like a good value for the dollar, and addressed a lot of the issues that we saw. On December 6th, the board was notified that the scenario we were evaluating was not possible to implement due to busing bottlenecks at SACs, and we were given a revised price tag of almost $1 million, and that the 5th and 6th grade schedule would be separated from the 7th and 8th grade schedule, which was not in the original proposal that we were looking at. At our December 16th board meeting, the board directed the superintendent to include this scenario in his proposed budget, and at that meeting, I made it very clear that I thought it important to begin getting community feedback on this important scenario, based on the fact that sort of the Hanover study back in June made it very clear there was a lot of opposition to this scenario. If you exclude the holiday break from December 16th when we were notified, this has been less than a month when the board has been able to make a decision on this revised schedule and the revised price tag. It wasn't until the evening of January 7th that the superintendent sent an email to all parents in the district with the proposed start time schedule. And this was actually after the meeting with the elementary school parents, so they didn't have their, regular PTC meeting to sort of discuss this. Between January 7th and January 19th, I've received almost 200 emails from families. 52% of those emails were opposed to the change, 45% were in favor of the change, and 3% just had questions or comments about the potential change. Of the emails that I received in this period, 28% were from parents of elementary school parents who were opposed to the early start, and then and another 28% were from people I couldn't identify, the ages of their children. But doing a little research in this weekend, I noticed that there is not a single elementary school in Fairfield County that begins its elementary schools before 8 a.m. A traditional elementary school that starts at kindergarten, none of them start before 8 a.m. So I think we would be an outlier if we decided to pursue this proposal. In addition to these issues with the elementary schools, at the high school, I still would like to reiterate that I have serious concerns about the loss of the 45-minute planning period after school that is likely to move the high school student help, make-up tests, quizzes, and many, if not most, clubs to the morning. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. I believe this to be an educational equity issue. While many students would be able to have parents drive them to school early, and there is a percentage of our population that relies on bus transport to get to school in the morning and get that extra help, or to get to school, and so they wouldn't be able to get to school early without a bus transport. I believe that we could be inadvertently disadvantaging a segment of our population that most needs access to the enrichment or extra help. I've also heard from a number of our teachers that this change could dramatically impact the culture at our high school. Many teachers who are currently willing to stay after school to work with students will no longer have this flexibility due to the need to race home to get to their own families. Given all these concerns, I believe that we need to take the next few months to engage the parent community at all levels more directly on maybe this new specific plan, for them to comment on via survey, which I agree with Carl, and focus groups with real projected costs. Maybe there's a better plan out there that we have not considered that will be better supported by all, or at least more than 50% of the stakeholder groups. I'm impressed with how Westport did not let perfect be the enemy of the good, and that they're moving their start times for high school to 8 o'clock. It's not perfect, but they have no budget impact, and it may be something that if we are willing to compromise, we can get a larger group willing to sign on to that proposal. And this would give high schoolers more sleep, which we all agree is a good goal. For these reasons, I don't believe that we'll be ready to implement a plan for next year that gives parents, teachers, and the community adequate time to prepare. I would also suggest that this issue might deserve a special budget request independent of our normal budget, so we could take it out of this budget cycle. The way I envision is we take it out of the budget this year, because I don't think we're giving families and parents and teachers adequate time, given that we're asking for a lot of money and we won't know until April if that is approved or not. So we take it out of the budget cycle. We work, as we're going through the budget process, we work on finalizing a plan with finalized cost, go to the various town boards for a special, off cycle and say, this is what we're looking for next year, to get an indication so that everybody can prepare if they would be willing to fund that type of proposal. I think we are rushing this. I think, I like, the idea of looking at an alternate solution. It may be the right thing, but I don't think I will be ready by February 3rd to make a decision on that. And we're supposed to vote tonight on the dollars, and, it's kind of like voting on something I don't really know what's in it. So I'm uncomfortable that way. So therefore, I would be And I can wait to make the motion, but I will be making a motion to remove the $954,521 from the fiscal 2020-2021 budget. Brendan?
So I am supportive of keeping the start time change scenario in the budget for a number of reasons, most of which have been stated tonight. I won't repeat every single one. Number one, from a cost perspective, it's my view that once this board decides that something like this, after 2.5 years of work and analysis and excellent work by the administration, that we decide, which I think, most of us have, at least that we've heard from tonight, that we need to do something to improve the health and wellness of our kids, then the cost becomes, it's obviously important, but it's something that I feel like we need to do, because the health and wellness of our kids is really why we're here, along with education, obviously, but the two go really hand in hand. So I think it's extremely important that we support, as the Board of Ed and as a town, and that's why I think if we approve the budget tonight, I think the town will support it, because we're doing it for the right reasons. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of educating the community and giving them an opportunity to provide feedback to us, I think we've gotten a ton of feedback over not just the last 2 weeks or month, but over the last year or two, and that's come from emails. It's come from people that I'm sure many of us see on a daily basis in town, and I'd say at all levels I've gotten all different opinions. So elementary school parents who say, I want my kids to go to school earlier. People say, I want my kids to go to school later, and it's just dependent upon their kids and their particular situation. So it's no surprise that when we do these surveys, it almost is independent of the scenario. We get somewhere between 42 and 52% for, and the opposite against. We're dealing with a lot of change or no change, and we have roughly half the community of parents supportive or not in the various scenarios. It's just an extremely difficult issue, so it's on us to make the right call. I think it's somewhat disingenuous after all the work that we've done to suggest that there's a theoretical better scenario out there. I think it does make sense to give ourselves another couple of weeks to analyze whether we swap the first and third tiers. I think that makes sense to do, and as Carl said, get some incremental feedback. I don't think that hurts. I have a suspicion that we'll get a lot of emails about parents wanting their elementary kids to go to school earlier instead of later, but we'll see what the feedback is. But I think this is extremely important, for all of our students. I also think, probably frankly more important than what we do tonight is what we do after tonight. If we do choose as a board to include this $950,000 in the budget, this is a step, but it's one step in frankly a journey around making this change, but supporting our students in many different ways and working with the community to make sure that support starts before the school day and ends well after the school day ends. Whether it's athletics or childcare, those kinds of things. And I think we as a board really have to work with the community to make sure those those issues are addressed.
Thank you. Julie? So I echo much of what everyone said. And again, Katrina, thank you for your leadership on this, and Brian for all the work that you've done. So I've struggled with this also over the last few weeks, trying to discern, I guess, what the best path forward is, because it's really hard when we're the ones making these decisions for our town, and it seems like a good number of people, a good percentage, are unhappy, and that's hard. But I think over the last couple of weeks, as we've been getting these emails and as we've been meeting together, I have come back again to the science and to the fact that we really need to be thinking about the health of our kids first. One of the things that has particularly struck me, and sorry, I'm kind of going back and forth here, is that I guess has struck a chord, have been the teacher emails that have really only in the last few days started coming in. And they're such a valuable part of our children's education. This is what makes our school district so great. And so the idea that any of them feel, or a decent number feel as though we haven't paid attention to them, as though we're making their situation tougher is hard. So I just want us to continue, no matter what our decision, to be very mindful of what teachers will be going through in terms of childcare situations or their own commutes or whatever. But I do come back to something, Brian, that you said in one of our meetings, and maybe not stating it correctly, but if we try to look at some of the things that we haven't quite figured out yet, for example, some of the after-school clubs or extra help or whatever, as stumbling blocks rather than, as hurdles rather than stumbling blocks, or that's going to, I'm messing it up. But the idea that we can figure it out. We might not have figured out everything yet, but we're going to. And I feel confident, and there are always going to be growing pains, but I think that we can't, as tempting as it is to put this off for one more year and to try to work through everything, I just think there will always be things that we don't quite get to. And then just finally, I like the idea of thinking about this alternate plan as well, the idea of the elementary starting later, because, Deanna, to your point, not a single elementary school in our DIRG starts before 8, so I think that's really important. But I do agree with keeping the number in the budget for this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. I'll be honest. I've been struggling with this one myself. I'm very supportive of the start times. I think it's a good idea. I know my kids in high school, they always struggled in the mornings. I'd love to see them get a little extra time, and I pretty much hounded them to go to bed at night too. So I get it. I'll be honest, without this alternate, I was pretty much against, though, the 7:45 for elementary. I would not be supportive of that, because it's very early, and I just feel like for the little kids, I do feel like they'd be at a disadvantage getting up that early. So I like this alternative plan with the swapping the elementary in 5-6. I'd be supportive of that. I would not be supportive of the elementary, the first, I don't know what scenarios you're calling it. I'm calling it the first, last one, whatever you want to call it.
We go with A and B.
Yeah, A and B.
Use
but
numbers, so
I
just without letters.
don't like the early elementary one, so I would not support that one. I think there's time. I don't know if we do a subcommittee, something that can get in a room and really, figure things out. If that ends up, the 5-6 elementary swap ends up being the final one, or if there's more work to be done to figure it out. I hear the concerns that Deanna has too on the early morning help. I can see that being a problem. So I don't know if that's a blocker in my mind, but it's definitely an issue. I didn't really put as much thought into it as I probably should have. But yeah, so I'd love to see us all vote on late start or not. I'd like to make a motion to vote on it. Let's put the cards on the table and say yes, up or down. So I'd like to make a motion to adopt late start 2021, and we'll figure out the scenarios as we move on. So somebody could second it if they want.
I think what you're doing is doing that by leaving the budget or not leaving the budget.
Yeah, right, we have an amendment to deal with. Are there any other, Carl?
I'll just make, one more comment, and it's similar to what everyone's made, and it's a super difficult decision with a lot of different voices and a lot of different considerations. And when you're faced with a situation like that, you really need to go back to first principles. And the first principle here is the health and well-being of the students. And as Sherry indicated, the foremost leading health bodies of this country, all of them, the AMA, CDC, and most importantly in this case, the American Academy of Pediatrics, have flagged this, and they do not do that lightly to adopt a resolution of this as policy. And I think and I'll just quote from the pediatricians, "The reasons behind the current epidemic of insufficient sleep are complex and interrelated. From a biological perspective, at about the time of pubertal onset, most adolescents begin to experience a sleep-wake phase delay, later sleep onset and wake times, manifested as a shift of up to 2 hours relative to sleep-wake cycles in middle childhood. Two principal biological changes in sleep regulation are thought to be responsible for this phenomenon." So I think one thing that's been lost here is there's this idea of hours of sleep, and we've lost a little bit the idea of when and when children sleep. And that's the point for the older kids, is they cannot get to sleep on average. This is an on average study before 11 o'clock. So they are constrained in their sleep from that. And I think it's as we come down to the final stretch here, to not lose sight of that important point. And then this kind of concludes it. Although a number of factors, including biological changes in sleep associated with puberty, lifestyle choices, and academic demands, negatively affect middle and high school students' ability to obtain sufficient sleep, the evidence strongly implicates earlier school start times, i.e. before 8:30 a.m., as a key modifiable contributor to insufficient sleep, as well as circadian rhythm disruption in this population. So to me, that's the first principle.
Deanna.
So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear that I'm not debating the sleep science or anything else. I'm really, I have an issue with the process. I think we have not engaged the community early enough, and I do believe that a good plan poorly executed is a bad plan. And I do believe that we are putting our teachers and our youngest families in this community in a very difficult position, having to race to make alternate choices. And I think I mentioned to a bunch of you that I talked to some of our preschools. They're not ready for this change. Parents have come to them. They've signed contracts for next year, so they will not be able to, make adjustments to their schedule for next year. We're 2 years out. And I just think, and if I ask them, people say, well, it's been in the paper. And I'm like, it's not the paper's job to communicate to our parents and our community about what we're doing as a board. And we need to specifically notify all those people about what we're doing. And what some parents have said, I said, well, it's been out there for 2 years. And they're like, yeah, but you were looking at 3 different things, and I didn't know what you were looking at. And it wasn't until January 7th when a specific plan was emailed to families and teachers that people started to focus. And that is what we are seeing. And so I'm not debating the science, I'm not debating the health benefits, I am debating the process, and that we have not engaged our stakeholders specifically, because this plan that we were looking at, we got a Hanover study last June. It showed it was very unpopular, but we continued down the path with the administration in isolation, looking at it without, I have questions about the 45-minute in-between bus schedules. If we add more buses, it doesn't make sense to me that we have to have 45 minutes between each tier. Logistically, it's if you have more buses, you should be able to bring kids to school quicker, and we might have better solutions with a better option out there that would make more people happy. And so I totally agree with you, Carl, that we should be, led by the science. I just think that we have not, I don't believe we've exhausted all the potential options. And this option that we've put in forth is a good idea, and we can look at it. But I don't think 2 weeks and to put almost $1 million into a budget with something that we're kind of like saying, hey, I think that's a good idea, and we really are not thoughtfully evaluating that with surveys and really kind of going back and digging, because we kind of picked in stock and didn't veer. I was surprised on December 6th when we had a very different plan at a very different cost structure, and we didn't say, hey, maybe we need to kind of step back and look at something else. So anyway, I just want to make sure that, people understand that I am not against a start time change. It is, I think it needs to be more thoughtfully approached than we have to date.
Brendan?
Yeah, I just want to address a couple of those topics. One is that, we haven't analyzed all the different scenarios and the dynamics around, bus routing and why it takes, roughly 45 minutes between tiers. We have absolutely done that. The administration's done that. We've gone through that in a ton of detail as a board. We've looked at multiple scenarios with literally bus by bus, where they're picking kids up and when. So we have done that. We've looked at many, many different scenarios, and we've come up with the scenarios. First, we whittled it down to a handful, and then more recently have focused on this one alternative with this modification of the first and third as of tonight. But the constraints we've talked about as a board, we've talked about with the public, and there has been communication over time with the community, with parents, with the PTCs, with the PFA, to make sure that people are informed. Again, the feedback has been helpful, I think, to make us, think about the various issues that stakeholder groups, that parents have, and make sure that we're taking those into account as we think about the best path forward.
Jen?
I'm just hoping, Brian, would you be able to maybe talk a little bit about this potential swap and what, I'm sure you've done an initial look at it since we've, I guess been talking a little bit over the weekend about potential cost difference or how easy or hard it will be to just give us that second option. And secondly, I know that there are potential accommodations that we can do for some teachers. I'm concerned about our teachers as well, and I know a lot of us are. Maybe potential accommodations that you have been thinking about, or, if this does go through, what are we going to do, for some of these teachers that have, problems with commutes or whatever, and if you have any ideas on potential accommodations, or if you're not willing to speak of that, I don't know. Yeah.
Hi, Viv. Sure, I'd be glad to. First, as we've met with the teachers, as you know, Dr. Krenti and I have gone to each of the buildings and had an opportunity to meet with the teachers and spent a good hour or so at each of the locations. One of the things I shared with them was if there's something that's unique or particular in their situation, that as they look at a new scenario, no matter what it's going to be, any kind of change, and if it looks to them like it's not going to fit in that new scenario, not to assume no, but to assume maybe, and to bring that forward to us so that we can talk about it, so we can try to figure out if there's a way to make whatever accommodation or change, whatever may be specifically for that individual teacher. See, when we solve, and Carl mentioned it before, we're solving for average as we do this, right? We're looking for the average sleep cycle of our students. We're looking for a whole system change. And the system we have has been in place for a long time. And so certain things have been tweaked or developed or sort of come about as a result of that have worked for teachers based on issues they have. And often when we're a part of a change like this, we assume if it's not going to work for us, we assume no. So with the teachers, we've said at each of the locations, I think, to assume maybe, come to us and let's talk, and we'll try to figure this out. Because as you all very articulately said, we honor and value our teachers and the work that they're doing. They're important partners in all of what we do. They're with our children all day, every day here in the schools, and we're partners in this work. So we want to make sure that we stay that way, and that's the goal. As far as the scenario itself, we had looked at it earlier in the process, and there were a couple of challenges with it that led us to the scenario A, if we want to call it that, what we've been talking about. So glad to sort of pick up where that left off and continue and prepare that for you. Some of the challenges include, we were capturing an efficiency in the morning by delivering to the 3 neighborhood elementary schools that are across, 3 different spots in town. If the 5-6 is the first tier, you're covering the whole town. So you are lengthening the bus rides for those children, and it's likely that some may be picked up before 7, as you look at it, just because of the distance where they live in relation to the town, to the school. The tiers, we have to look at that and see just kind of what time you need in between. We'll build the scenario based on the resources that we've been talking about. The 45 minutes could be tight. We have to look at it. When we look at the scenarios, so we've been saying this from the beginning, we do our best based on the data that we have, the kids that are in the system, we model it out, we develop them, but we don't know until we know, to the point of sort of when we have those kids, we have the kindergartners, we build the routes, and we know which high school students are not taking the bus, which ones are. There are many sort of moving variables with this. So we target the times as we can, but we also ask for a little, plus or minus as required as we build this out. We're looking at something a little different going forward, using sort of mid-sized buses. I know we talked about this a little bit. The mid-sized buses might help us capture a little bit of time in that they can do some of the longer routes, perhaps. Again, this is things that we'll have to look at, so we'll try to do some modeling there. The afternoons could be tight. The challenge for 8 o'clock, and I know I've said it, but just to go back, because we all sit here saying, gosh, if you could just have your first school start at 8 o'clock, it's a different conversation. Every minute you take in the morning to make that later is a minute you put in the afternoon to make the 3rd tier later. They're just directly connected. So what we do is make the tiers as tight as we can, and then figure out, okay, where are we comfortable on the end, and then sort of we can work back to see when that starting time is. So if we were to, again, just make that move, you do have to pay for it on the other side, on that 3rd tier. So we will certainly develop this, look at when the pickup times are, look at, strengths of it, look at some challenges with that, and then at the next board meeting, be prepared to share both scenarios, sort of pros and cons, and have that discussion if that's the way it goes. I'm glad to do that. But just preliminarily, there are a couple of challenges with it. Certainly, there's some advantages as well that we'll have to take a look at, and we'll be glad to talk about it.
Are you comfortable with the number that's in there now for this other option?
It's hard to say until you literally, because as you mentioned, when Roy builds out these scenarios, it's child by child, stop by stop as we look at it. That's what we'll do. We'll build with the resources that we have, with the number of buses we're talking about, and see if there's a trade-off in time or something else along the way. But it's the best we can do.
Right.
Sherry?
So I just want to add on to Brendan's comments about the modeling that's been done, because I think going back to the summary over the past 2.5 years, there's been extensive modeling. We've sat several times with Roy Wilder, the Director of Transportation, and I'm repeating what you just said, but we have the constraint both for the start and the stop. So, and we've been assured that we've looked at kind of every iteration in between there. We've rejected the 2-tier because of cost, and because also it would line us up for an 8 and a 9 shift, and that's not ideal either. So I'm left with the conclusion that we have looked at every possible scenario. So with that in mind, I feel like it's essential tonight we have to vote on the budget. I feel like if you're in support of the health and wellness of children and honoring the American Pediatrics recommendations, then tonight is a vote to support that we move forward to continue to look at this. The alternative is if we take it out, we start over at square zero next year. There's no assurances that the town would look at this off cycle. There's no assurances that this would be able to be in the budget cycle next year. So I think it's essential tonight that we make a decision to either vote to support later start times or not. And I also feel like we should be, as a board, conscious that I mean, we've had our administration working on this for 2.5 years. So if we're not going to vote yes tonight, then we have to be ready to say stop, because we can't have them working on initiatives in perpetuity. So again, that's why I'm in support. I think there are still some important questions. I definitely want to see this, the elementary at a 9:15 a.m. tier, but I feel like we need to continue moving forward with this.
Kiana?
So I have a question, just procedurally. Let's say you look at this other scenario and we can't do it in the 9:54, whatever, I might gotta get my glasses back on, $521. So we voted on a budget and you determine that we can't do this in the budget that we've allotted, and we've already voted on the budget. So what happens?
Well, there'd have to be a decision around resourcing. I know the town council can't add into the budget.
No.
I don't believe the Board of Finance can either. although
They
I'd
can
have to check.
add,
They
Board
can
of
add.
Finance can add,
Okay.
they can do add or subtract.
Okay, so I think it would have to be a discussion in part there, since that's where the budget would be in process.
So we're trying to, I appreciate what you're saying, Sherry. I don't have any problems with the board. I disagree that a vote tonight is saying, if you don't vote for this budget, that you're saying, I don't agree with the American Academy of Pediatrics. What I'm saying is that we need to do more work. We don't even know what the costs are associated with this potential option. We're trying to vote on a budget that we don't know. I mean, I feel like we are voting on something before we know what's in it. And I know we won't be able to get a SurveyMonkey response in 2 weeks. I mean, it took a long time to get the Hanover. I don't know. I mean, unless you tell me you can create a survey, administer to every parent and in the district, and have the results collated by the February 3rd meeting, I'm not sure, how we.
Yeah, if that was the direction of the board, that's what we would do.
Okay.
We would do.
I think with the awareness in town,
Just,
So we would have to go back to the Board of Finance. If on February 3rd, we voted on this budget, we don't have enough money in the budget for the revised option, you would have to, in that process, say, I'd like more than the board. I don't know how that actually works, because we're the one that approves the budget. This is where I don't know legally how this works. I mean, they can add to our budget, I guess, based on community feedback. But we can't officially ask, I don't know that you can officially ask them for more money than the board allows you to ask them,
Right, I would be bringing the Board of Education's budget forward.
right?
And in that conversation, I would explain to them the situation and the need, and it would be up to them to decide. But I can also say on February 3rd, I'll know for sure what the process would be, if that's the case. Right.
But I'm having to vote tonight.
We'll vote, yeah. The vote tonight is whether we want to fund the scenario that we've been talking about. We have additional discussion about whether we want to modify that scenario to swap the first and third tier, which would happen on, February 3rd. My sense is that if the numbers are different, they're not going to be very different, just because all we're doing is swapping the first and third tier. But we're essentially, tonight, we're voting to fund the scenario that we've been talking about, and we have an opportunity on the 3rd to say, no, we actually we don't want to do, have the elementary schools go first. We want them to go 3rd. And we want 5 and 6 to go first. And we'll have a conversation, as Brian said, about what the, budgetary impacts at that date would be, in which case the next conversation you have is with the Board of Finance as to, whether there needs to be tweaks to the budget. That's how I think about it. I don't know.
I just have another question, because you brought up something. So let's say we, on February 3rd, what I worry about now, in what you're just saying, we potentially, there are, Bob said he's not in favor of Tier 1, but by voting for this budget, if we don't on February 3rd choose to go with the revised thing, then by default, we are doing Tier 1, even though there are members of this board that are concerned about Tier 1. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know, this process is not really, I've never run into this before, and I don't know how we approve a budget for one thing, then, you know, there are members of this board that are concerned about the budgeted item that we're looking at, and then we're saying, well, February 3rd, we'll go back, and we may or may not do that, and I'm a little confused about this process.
Well, why couldn't we add time? I know everybody says we can't, but why can't we not vote on the budget tonight, add more time to the schedule?
Well, the budget goes to the Board of Selectmen on Thursday. And the process itself is actually governed by statute in part, so the timelines are all developed and approved through the town. The
So it's
Board of
in the
Selectmen
Canaan
has it for 2
statutes?
weeks. Part of it is the charter, other is sort of based on that final April date of the vote with the town council and works backwards from that. But so the Board of Selectmen has a tight window with it of only the 2 weeks. So we go there on Thursday, then a week later, they're approving really the capital piece of it, and then we go to the Board of Finance. So it is a tight timeline. I guess I'd say that, you know, a budget is an itemized estimate of what we believe the costs are going to be for many of the things that we do. There are times that we think it's going to be X, and it winds up being X minus something or X plus something, and we try to figure that out. This is such a large number, and we're talking about a bus. It's $100,000 for a bus, so certainly I understand the trepidation around that. But in general, it's not all that different than as we're budgeting for other things. You know, we do our best to anticipate what the costs are, but they're itemized estimates based on what we know, and that's the role of a budget as we develop it, is to serve that function. There is, as we said, that piece around the Board of Finance if need be. And our goal would be to develop this scenario at the cost of what we've been looking at with scenario A, to see what it looks like with scenario B. You're right to a point, certainly, that the more buses, does it shorten the time? But we do hit a breaking point, just that's governed really by the number of miles the buses have to drive. So there's that. So I think that 45 minutes sort of gets us there. What we have to look at is the turnaround time on the buses, both at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, for the time on that, as far as, again, trying to tweak that a little bit. But our goal would be to develop this at this proposed amount. But if we also see that more money would make it more efficient in one way or another, whether time or other things, then we would certainly bring that to the table as well on the 3rd for discussion, and then ultimate decision, but it's not that different than, it's just the scale is so much different as we work through to do this. For instance, we bring forward our capital budget, we might have a number that's, for a roof or for other things. We've gotten those numbers from consultants as we've done some work. I think the cogen is an example. It's our best known number right now. It may go up, it may go down as we get into the field and conditions, and we're able to take a look at that. But because we don't have that specific number, it doesn't preclude us from moving forward in the process. I don't know if that's helpful.
Just a quick point on the, if I may, on the swapping, and this is speculative, but that if you did swap them, it's 2 grades, 5th and 6th grade, with the entire fleet of buses. So you should be able to take that resource, I would think, and get them there more rapidly, even though you're having to cover more distance because you're bringing them all to a single central location and not the 3 individual schools. And then on the back end, that efficiency that we had with the elementary schools all going at the same time up front should apply in the back end, where you're picking them up at, closer to their homes where they live. So that should be shorter in terms of that.
So we have that efficiency in our current system now with East and West. So I do think we have, as a sort of a ballpark, the length of students' rides today would probably be similar to the length of the rides in that scenario for those students. Again, we're going to redo the route to look at them, but just for discussions purposes. And then it just would be 10 minutes later if it's a step of 9:15 start to 3:45. Right now we're 9:05 to 3:35. So just as a ballpark on that. But agreed with the efficiencies and what that could look like with those buses on 5-6. We just have to see it. Again, it's about, we don't want to sit and overpromise and underdeliver. We want to see what it all looks like so that we can make an informed decision.
Okay. Any other comments, feedback? Okay, should we move on to budget discussion, just general budget discussion?
I had a motion on the table. So,
Okay. Well, there is a motion already. In our last meeting, their motion is on the table, so tonight, we just vote on the budget.
no, I put a motion about late start, because
Yeah.
I like
Oh.
to vote,
Oh, okay,
It's an amendment to the budget.
okay. So is there a second
is there
for
a
that?
second?
Okay,
Is
so
the
is there,
motion. The motion was to implement late start for 2021, and that will work out the details as far as times and scenarios. 2021,
Fiscal
right?
21.
But how is that motion different than the budget motion? Because
It's.
Okay,
it's
I'll make a
just
different
separate.
motion, because it'll be more iterative. I am going to move to remove the 954,521.
Yeah. can
Well,
we-
because he's doing a budget. His is the budget. His is actually
Well, no,
including
we-
it in the budget.
No,
Will you
I'm
say it-
just,
will you say
I'm
it again,
voting,
Bob?
I'd like to vote on the topic. Whether it's in the budget or not,
Oh,
it's a
okay.
separate
Okay.
concept.
okay, so, all right, so your motion
Was to
is
include,
to include,
to approve late start for 2021.
okay. Is there a second for that motion?
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
are
not
we
clear. I'm not sure
procedurally, is that what we're
I
doing?
think that procedurally, I think that right
2021.
now you're discussing what's on the floor, which is the
Right.
budget.
Yeah.
I think you have to finish the
2021.
budget discussion and vote on it before a new motion about a different issue comes up. So because it's the budget has been, it's been moved and seconded in the last meeting.
Right.
And this was brought on as a continuation of that discussion,
Oh,
right? I think you have to finish that discussion prior to introducing a new motion.
Got it.
Onto the floor. Okay.
all right, so
Okay.
now Deanna's
So,
going to.
so my motion is related to the budget, so it's appropriate now. I would make a motion to remove the $954,521 from the 2020-2021 budget. Take the next 3 or 4 months to, really dive into the scenario we're looking at, look at a special, meeting or appropriation, I don't know how it, but for implementation in 2021, 2022. So that would be my motion.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Okay.
So if I second it, then we can discuss it.
Yes,
So I would second it so we can have some discussion. Because if
Okay.
we don't.
right, it dies.
Right. Okay, discussion.
Yeah. We just discussed it, I mean.
Okay. I mean, in discussion, I'll just say there was a time in our country when a lot of people smoked cigarettes, and then science came out letting us know that that wasn't a healthy thing to do, and our country's behavior changed. I think that what we're talking about now, and it's not unique to New Canaan, it's actually a national issue, but all of the health and wellness markers for our teens are plummeting, and the science shows us that sleep deprivation is a key factor in that. So I think that it's important that we keep the learning schedule, start times in the budget so that we can move forward. I understand there are questions that still need to be answered. Brian has assured us that the appropriate work will be done, and that he will come back on February 3rd with more information.
Brendan?
So kicking the can on this, I think presumes two things. One, that we'll be able to miraculously find a scenario that we haven't already examined that we think will do a much better job for our school system, for our kids and families than anything else that we've seen. And I do think that, for the reasons I stated and others have stated tonight, we've looked at many, many, many different scenarios in a ton of detail. The other thing it presumes is that we'll miraculously get feedback from the community that says that is the best scenario, and we have overwhelming support from it, which based on the feedback we've gotten on a number of different scenarios, I think is just a pipe dream, frankly, because we've always been within that 42 to 52 or 55% range with people on both sides of every scenario. I don't think that it makes a whole lot of sense to continue to kick the can on this and make a decision for, a future school year. I think it makes sense to make a decision now because we've examined this for the last 2.5 years.
Thank you. Any other comments? Deanna?
And I'll just say, the discussion tonight has proven we don't even have a budget number for another scenario. We're not even sure what scenario we're voting on. So I have a fundamental issue with approving money on something I'm not even sure what I'm approving yet, which I think most of the community should have a problem with. I think that, what we do in this, for the start times has to be reflective of our community. And every community is doing something different. Every single one. Despite, the research that's out there, they do what makes sense for their own communities. And we need to make sure whatever we decide is right for this community. And right now, I'm not sure that we have enough information to make a decision that's right for this community. I was really impressed with Westport that said, you know what, 8 o'clock work, it isn't perfect. It is not a perfect option, but it works for our community, and it gets our high school students more sleep. And quite frankly, I think that that is an option that we might be able to have better success with our teachers in looking at. And, I do believe that there is, if we had more buses, because when we looked with Roy, we were looking at a static number of buses. And so we weren't looking at, if you added 3 more buses to the scenario he put out with, specific times, if we added 3 buses to that scenario, how much quicker could it go? If we staged buses, I see buses staged all over town. If we staged them differently, could we shrink that and get, a little more time so that the time between scenarios is tighter and, we could get better times for all schools? I don't think we've done that hard work because we've sort of delegated it to the administration, and the board hasn't been in those conversations as we're doing the work. And so I think we need to be more engaged with the work and maybe bringing a few people in, teachers and members of the community that have expressed concerns or proponents of changing time. We need to bring a few more people in doing the work, because I know that that's what Westport did. And I think that you get to a better solution than, I think you guys did a great job, but I think we need to do more work.
Okay. I just want to make a point of clarification on the Westport comment, because that's the recommendation of the committee.
Right,
It is
which has
not gone
teachers
before
on
the
it.
board, though.
But it's a
so
no-cost
not a
option,
decision.
yeah.
Yeah, correct.
And
That's
it's
the
a
option
no-cost
they're
option.
recommending, but there are a lot of concerns very similar to those here, so.
Right,
anyways.
and Norwalk hasn't changed because they haven't gotten it voted through the town, their financial bodies yet.
Also, just a clarification in Westport, they were able to push back and still have their elementaries end at 9 a.m. So
Right.
every community is different, so we couldn't do that. We couldn't
Right.
push our high school back to 8, because then we'd have elementaries at 9:35 a.m., which all of our
Well,
teachers
that's
have
where I'm
indicated is
having a-
much too late in the day
Okay.
for their endurance and learning. So
That's where I
not an
have a
option for us.
distinction, a concern about the time between tiers, and maybe doing more research on that.
Okay, Brendan.
Yeah, and just to point out again, that we have actually looked at many different scenarios that look at, and what's driving the 45 minutes roughly between the tiers is the geography of the town, which is massive, particularly compared to a town like Westport. And, Norwalk has community elementary schools, and I think, multiple upper tier schools. So every community is very different. We've done the work to say, okay, look at elementary schools, then upper tier, then 5th, 6th, look at things swapped, look at other scenarios. The reality of the town is it's roughly 40 to 45 minutes between tiers. So if you start your first tier, the high school, 7 through 12 at 8 o'clock, the next tier is at 8:45, and the last tier is at 9:30, as Sherry said. So, we can talk about a hypothetical, theoretical scenario that's the perfect scenario where all schools start between 8 and 8:45, but it does not exist. We have looked at all of these different scenarios, implying that it may exist and that the community is going to be 75 or 80 or 85% supportive of that theoretical scenario that doesn't exist. Does not make sense to me at this point in time.
Okay. All right, so I think now we'll vote on the motion to remove school start time budget from the budget for the 2021 budget. All in favor? Opposed?
This is backwards.
All right. Are there any other comments related to the budget, but not school start times, before we vote on the budget? I think-
I just had one, it's sort of more of a comment than anything, but it sort of follows on from our presentation from Joe Spurgeon on our health benefits. It's frankly, it's very difficult to understand, and that's coming from a finance person. It's our plan year is not the same as our fiscal year, and then we have, all sorts of actuarial adjustments that go into budgeting for the number, which also changes over time because we have experience every single month, which drives the actuarial analysis. But I spent a bunch of time on it, and I came away with a view that what we have in our budget is very sustainable, and the reason for that is that we're actually realizing, we already realized earlier in this fiscal year, but in the last plan year, we realized savings for the first 2 months, and then thus far in this fiscal year, we're already realizing savings, relative to what was in the budget. So if you combine those two things, we're essentially, fully funding our healthcare costs on a run rate basis. It just so happens that we're doing a great job as it relates to managing our healthcare costs. It doesn't mean that we're gonna, be down 11% year over year. For every year going forward, but it does mean that what we have in the budget this year is sustainable at this current level. Obviously, taking into account the fact that healthcare costs increase over time, all else being equal. We'll obviously do our best to offset that, but I just wanted to point that out after having spent some time on it.
Thank you.
And I just would like to share, just so that, from the administration, the board asked 72 questions of us of the budget, and I want to thank the team for responding quickly and getting those responses together and getting them, back to you ASAP. We will be uploading those questions and answers on the website sometime tomorrow, so we'll format it appropriately and get that up for anybody who wants to see and is interested in, some of those questions as well. But as a document going back and forth, so want to say thank you, for the thought that went behind those questions, and say thank you for the team and everyone for getting those responses together. So we'll get those out and make that public on the website. And also just to share that if folks don't know, the 2-hour budget workshop that we held on Thursday last week over in the gym, in the auxiliary gym, to thank the administration for coming for that as well. I know you had to shuffle your schedules around and do other things, and to say thanks to Tony, and thanks to all of you for making yourselves available to be able to have that conversation and be a part of that. So, sorry.
Carl?
Also on the internal services fund related to the health benefits, as I said in the last meeting, that I wanted to make sure that that was a sustainable number, because obviously that was the great news of the budget and drove the headline number. And so I too dug into that quite extensively, not this past weekend, but the weekend before. Maybe not to the extent that Brendan did, but it is confusing, and it's confusing because of the reserve policy. And so there's a release of a reserve. So it looks like you can interpret that there's a one-time release of a reserve, but that's really not what's going on. Is there's a harvesting of there's a dividend that's coming in as a result of the good work that's been done in recent years. One in the food service area to get that house in order, and so now the food service operation is able to contribute $200,000 towards their health benefit coverage, and that appears to be sustainable, and maybe we can even do better. There is a $152,000 savings in the stop loss policy. Part of that is because of the claim experience, and the other part of that is going out to bid with the town and having the economies of scale in that regard. And the other and most important is there's a $428,000 reduction in claims from the previous budget. So that totals to about $800,000. And There's actually, I think, additional leeway in there. There's probably another $100,000 potentially in the lower stop loss claim, if the pricing holds for what it's been the last 2 years. And if the claims experience holds, there could be another $500,000 there roughly. So there's, by my calculations, $800,000 to $1.4 million in sustainable savings in the healthcare area. So essentially, that cost has been shifted down, and then it'll grow from there. So that is a sustaining aspect of the budget, and it's a result of good work that was done by people before I got here.
Great. Any other comments? Okay. So with that, we will vote to approve as a second read the superintendent's 2021 budget. All in favor? Opposed?
Can I abstain? Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I mentioned, we will be with the Board of Selectmen on Thursday morning, where we'll give an overview of capital and then, of the operating, and we go into the capital quite a bit deeper, and the process continues. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, we have a number of very generous donations. Dr. Lutzy, if you would walk us through those, please.
I'd be glad to. As they do each season, the All Sports Booster Club is looking to donate $55,709 on behalf of our athletic program for 15 fall coaching stipends. As you know, they are very generous with the funds that they donate to us for this purpose. It allows us to both lower the coach to student-athlete ratio and to sometimes even have some programs that we couldn't otherwise have for some of our kids. We strive to have every child who wants to be part of our athletic program be a part, and this generous donation from the All Sports Booster Club helps us towards that goal. So this is for the fall sports, and just to say thank you once again. Pretty remarkable what they're willing to and able to donate for us each year. And just for those that are new on the board, the way donations work is $5,000 and above comes to the board for approval. $5,000 to $1,000 comes to me, and then below that is principals. And that's driven by board policy, and that's why we have these numbers.
So is there a motion to approve the donation in the amount of $55,709 on behalf of the New Canaan All Sport Booster Club? Brendan, second. Sherry? All in favor? Thank you.
Okay, so next we have two donations at South, two PTC donations, one for grade 3 guided reading books. The first is a donation in the amount of $7,085 on behalf of the South PTC for high grade 2 readers and low grade 4 readers. They'll all go into the grade 3 classrooms, but it helps us to expand the availability of books for all of our students in the classrooms there. And it's distributed among all of the classrooms, but we just aggregated the number to bring it for you tonight.
All right, is there a motion to approve the South PTC donation? Jen, second. Julie, all in favor?
Great, and then our last is a motion to approve the donation in the amount of $6,376.50 on behalf of the South PTC for grade 4, which are grade 4 guided reading books for, again, the classroom libraries over there at South.
Okay, motion. Deanna, second. Brendan, all in favor? Great.
So, just a question.
Sure.
So, for the South PTC, which this is wonderful, we're getting all these great donations, just sort of because of public school rules and having everything equitable. How are we doing the guided reading books through the other schools, through the general budget? Is that
Yep,
sort of?
well, they're all in a cycle. We've approved donations from PTCs at the other schools in
Okay.
past meetings and past
Okay.
years. So it's more of a refresh than anything else
Okay.
as we look at it. But
Okay.
we do keep an eye on that equity to be sure that it is
Perfect, thank you.
equal, balanced, yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, it's an important point. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments from the public? Please.
I know you've heard from me before, and I'm going to be a little scattered because I just wanted to respond to a few of the things that came up tonight. I definitely really appreciate that. I feel like we're being heard. I feel like I hear some comments that have been in the meetings recently being reverberated back from you guys, so I really appreciate that. But I think it's very telling that you're on the cusp of making a decision and you're throwing out another proposal and, well, a shift to the proposal. I think that's very telling. I think you need to go back and figure out something that works for everyone. And, you know, I heard a couple comments like, we've been looking at this for years, it's just time we need to move forward. You've been looking at it for years, but you're at the edge and you're, and you're saying, let's shift it, let's try to adjust it to meet the needs of the community. There's so many people coming out right now that are saying, this isn't what I want for elementary school parents, and I'm an elementary school parent, and I definitely have in my sight the fact that pretty soon I'm not going to be an elementary school parent, and I want a solution for the high school kids and the middle school kids. I don't want to derail that process. I just want this to be a trajectory that we all feel good about, and I don't think we're going to satisfy every person, but I think it's very telling that you're suggesting a change at the last minute, and I don't know enough about that change, but I appreciate that you're suggesting it. The other thing is, you're talking about a survey monkey for the town, which I think is great. I want to encourage more town participants. But if you go out to the town and you just say, what do you think about this proposal, and you don't have the information behind it, which is, for me, what is the earliest time that a child is going to be picked up? I'm not going to be able to give you an educated answer on that. If you just say, I'm going to toggle these two, what do you think? Like right now I'm thinking, okay, maybe that would work because the 5th and 6th graders were already kind of early, so it's not as big of an adjustment for them. But I don't know, then if you tell me that my little 5th grader is going to be picked up at 6:45 in the morning, I'm going to have a different view about it. So, you know, just if you do that, I think it's great, but just give us the information that we need to make the right decision. And then the final point is, I know you've been dealing with this for years, and I know that you feel like you've had the ear of the community. I just, again, I know I've said this so many times, I just don't think that you have had the ear of the elementary school parents. This became an issue for elementary school parents in, I'm going to get the date wrong, I think it was in July. You guys made a decision to move forward with only one proposal. That was the thing. It was like a light bulb went off in my head. And you can call me, you know, whatever you want for not paying attention to it.
It's 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Sorry, oh, go ahead. You guys go, you go ahead, because you're the public first. Sorry, and it's, no, I'm not responding. It's really.
I'm kind of new to this, but I just want to make, I guess, a couple of points. One is, I don't disagree that kids need, at the high school level, need more sleep, potentially. But I don't think it should be at the expense of elementary school kids, necessarily. I guess that a lot of the studies which you state also state that the average, what's required of a high school student versus an elementary school student who could be 7 or 8 years old, the difference in sleep requirement can be 2, 3, 4 hours. So I would hope that you would factor that into the consideration, so that so when you're starting a high school kid a little earlier, that person may need less sleep than an 8-year-old. I think sometimes we kind of lose that in all these studies, but I think that's been fairly consistent. I've seen high school kids need 8 to 10 hours, where elementary school kids need somewhere between 9 and 12 hours. So I would assume closer to 12 at the 7 or 8-year-old level. So there's quite a big difference, 2 or 3 hours, that's more required for an elementary school kid than a high school kid. So I'd like people to kind of consider that in their analysis as well. So it's for the good of, when you say it's for the good of the kids, I just want to be sure it's good for all the kids, not just certain kids more than others. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments?
Hi, Adam Sorensen. I'm a relatively new part of New Canaan. I just moved here back in 2018. I have a daughter in preschool, a daughter in elementary school. She's in kindergarten. You know, I'm sort of new to this, process and experience, and I, agree with Ms. Carlson and a lot of what she said about the process, and sort of, I understand there's been a lot of research, there's been a ton of fact base, about this issue, but I was never consulted as a preschool parent having a daughter coming into kindergarten the next year, during that survey data. And in looking at the Hanover study, I think it's cited something like 33 parents and their opinions about, what the new school start times did. And nowhere in there did I see any mention from those 33 elementary parents that that the schedule on childcare, was something that was disruptive to families. And I think at the end of the day, this is about community competitiveness and the point that no other schools in Fairfield start at 8 a.m., before 8 a.m. for the elementaries, is a big issue. If we're trying to attract working parents to this family, to grow our community, to elevate our real estate prices, I mean, in my mind, that's an important fact for us to consider in making the decision.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Claudia Monaco, and I'm here as both a kindergarten teacher at East and a mom of 3 kids in New Canaan Public Schools. And I want to thank you for all of the work that you've done, and I want to thank you for taking the time to read letters from parents, from teachers, from everyone. And I am happy to hear about this other option that you're considering, as my little one is actually going into kindergarten next year. So the thought of her getting on the bus at 7:06 was scary for me because she's used to a 9 o'clock preschool time. The thought of my 5th grader now starting later when it's first year in middle school, that was an issue too for our family. That could be potentially an issue with childcare. So hearing this change is a positive thing for me. I like knowing that we're still looking at other options, but at the same time, I feel like then we're not ready to make this decision for next year. I feel like on behalf of our students, who I agree teens need more sleep, I agree they have a lot going on. Maybe it's about we need to worry about overscheduling, too much homework, all of that too. There's a lot to take into consideration. But at the same time, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for this other option that you're looking at. And I do know, I'm looking forward to this survey as well. I know teachers and parents will definitely participate in this. But at the same time, I just think that kindergartners coming in, especially at the beginning of a school year, and coming in at 7:45, I can't even imagine that. Getting them up, maybe the first couple mornings might be easy, but 2 weeks in, I just don't think they'll be available for learning. I'm worried about, at our school, we don't start until 9:05, so if they were coming in at 7:45, it's just so early for them. Are they going to get there on time? Are they losing that reading instruction first thing in the morning? So I'm happy there's this other option, and I just hope we can somehow come to an agreement and make something work so that it works for high school, middle school, and elementary school. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Steve, 133 Springwater Lane. I really sympathize with the fact that everybody has a different personal situation with their kids, and everybody has different kids. But I felt compelled to provide a different personal situation. Up until 3 or 4 years ago, both my wife and I worked full-time out of the home. We didn't have a nanny, we didn't have an au pair. We relied on childcare, before-school programs, and babysitters. And I get that there's people who are used to their kids, whether they're 10 weeks old or 6 years old, having to be somewhere at 9 o'clock. My kids, from when they were 10 weeks old, managed to get somewhere every morning at 7:30. Again, that's my family. And so I would be just, if this was 10 years ago, I would be just as passionate standing up here saying, I would love for my kids to have to be somewhere at 7:30 in the morning, because that's when I would need to be at work. So I'm not discounting any of you, I'm not really, don't misunderstand me, who are saying that wouldn't work for my family. But I think what everyone has to understand is every family situation is different. And again, the only reason I felt compelled to stand up and say that is because I think you also need to get that there's people who would love to get their kids out of the house so they can go to work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none. Announcements and future business, Dr. Lutzy.
Well, it looks like we've got a lot of future business in the next couple of days. We'll be working, as we said, to develop the scenario and be ready to present it to the Board of Ed. In the meantime, we'll be presenting our operating and our capital budget, as I mentioned, to the Board of Selectmen on Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. We'll be following up with them the following week as well, as they move towards their approval, and then the Board of Finance meeting begins in February as we keep moving forward with our budget process. So another full agenda on the 3rd.
Yes, absolutely.
Katrina, I have a question. I have a question, because
Okay.
we didn't address it during the budget conversation, and I was trying to figure out when to ask, not related to any of this public comment. We talked about a Survey Monkey, and so I want to make sure that we, we didn't discuss, but you said if you are directed by the board, I would like to make a direction that you do that. And so we didn't discuss it, and I just want to make sure that that happens before our meeting on the February 3rd, so that we'll have results of a Survey Monkey for our February 3rd meeting.
Okay.
Does it make sense to have like a subcommittee to work on just late start? I mean, you want more work done, right? I mean,
Well, we've already approved the budget, so I don't know how we
Well,
do that.
but the problem's not solved.
I think is, oh, sorry. Go ahead. I think it is the plan of the administration to pull together a committee. We have to have the budget go through its cycle, but I think focus on implementation and solving a lot of the questions that still remain, absolutely. Do you have anything to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just a comment on that is we absolutely have to do that. And I think it needs to, frankly, it could be more than one because there are a bunch of different, things that move around the school day. It's childcare, it's, before and after school programs, it's athletics, it's, lots of different things.
But the first one's sort of to lock down the configuration.
Yeah.
Like, you can't plan before and after till you really have this configuration locked down. And that's part of the reason, I don't want it in the budget. I want to talk through it and get it nailed.
It's my view
There's a
that,
chicken and an egg problem here,
Okay,
right?
because we're off topic on the agenda. Going back to the original question, whether we want to do a survey, we can do a quick hands up, or yes, on those who feel that we should conduct a straw poll, not a vote.
So can I just understand that the Survey Monkey would be very short and essentially say there's 2 potential scenarios?
No, one. It's confusing with 2.
Okay, so
We would have to have 2.
no, we
That-
have to have two.
So, Dr.
well,
Lutzy, could you explain, could you maybe sketch out what you think the Survey Monkey would look like?
Sure. In the 30 seconds that I've given this.
Yes, that's all you need, right?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. We could certainly go back and put something together and show it to the board prior to something going out, if that's helpful. Well, as I heard it initially, it was to share the scenario A and the scenario B and to look for feedback on those 2 scenarios. I think that's where we would start, and then if some adjustments have to happen from there, we can do that. What I would look to do is probably make a phone call tomorrow morning, place a phone call out to Hanover, who's worked with districts doing this work, and see if they have had similar experiences, if they have something off the shelf that we could sort of plug into, and if not, we'll develop something. I mean, we're saying Survey Monkey, that's a tool that you would use. We have the email addresses for parents, and I have to think about the community a little bit, but there are other tools out there as well, so we'll explore which tools make the most sense to get. The goal would be rapid feedback, and if the board wanted to try to find a date to try to get together for a workshop on this prior to the 3rd, we're welcome. We would certainly be glad to take a look at the calendar and see if we can work something out and workshop it that way. The goal, just because it's been going on for a while, Bob, the board has really worked hard to operate as a committee of the whole in this. We've had a number of workshops. If you go back to the October workshop, you go back to others, over the last couple of years that have been devoted to this topic for the board to be able to operate as a committee of the whole. So instead of sort of breaking off a group of 3 or whatever, we've done it, with the monthly updates here at the board, and then workshops and other opportunities for deeper dives into information at kind of periodic times throughout. So
Sometimes a smaller, nimbler group can get a lot done.
Sure.
So
as Brenda mentioned, that is the plan ultimately, is to put together an implementation group that would include board members, community members, teachers, parents, others, and probably be at a district level, and then probably one at each school as well, as they look at challenges, because schools will have to look at changing master schedules, looking at what the flow of the day looks like, depending upon whether elementary is particular, but all of them, and plugging into whatever the new times are going to be. They have to start planning forward around that. So we'd look for implementation teams at each of the buildings, and then a district-wide that would really be doing, as I see it, outreach to community partners, to Park and Rec, to the Y, to others, to work with those partnerships, work with those folks, and to develop options for families as the needs arise.
As part of the poll, I think it would be helpful, I think people have had to have a hard time visualizing the constraints in this decision. And there's a lot of them, from when a school day starts to when sports begin in the FCAC, the bus travel times, the fact that we have one middle school that's 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and they need to split if we're gonna, so I think like a one-page visual of this is what we have currently, and then A and B, with all those constraints and some notes on there would be really helpful for people as they think this through.
We're going to draft together.
Okay. Thank you.
Good.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn? Brendan, second? Sherry, all in favor?
Great. Thank you.